Morning, morning, everybody. Michelle is here. Michelle is here. It's February 3rd, 2026. February 3rd on a Tuesday, 2026. I hope everybody's doing fantastic, magnificently, and marvelous because I am. So, there are several things to consider when you consider the consequences of things. When you are truly once you get into that deconstruction process, it takes it takes bravery to deal with the consequences of deconstruction. There's a consequence for everything, but there's also an opportunity to display your courage during those times, because base because in most cases people in their 40s and below, it may appear that their situations may be easier because of the fact that they are 40 and below. But if you're 50 and above, as myself, you may have gathered a little bit more resistance, but I say it's a little bit more experience, because that is the whole key to why we are who we are, for the experience. So it gives you an opportunity to understand, if you're paying attention and you're thinking clearly for yourself. Oh wow, now I understand why those consequences were in place. Now I understand why what I caused, in my 20s or adolescence, are coming back now as consequences and effects. It's a part of learning. And once you get into that mode of learning, it helps you to stay grounded. It helps you to stay focused, because you're going to run up against brick walls, literally, figuratively, and metaphorically. So what am I saying? I just had an intense conversation with someone that's close to me. And this person lives in a lot of fantasies, and this person exaggerates a lot, hallucinates a lot, but they get really, really angry when you point that out to them, because, in other words, there can be evidence of something happening, and that happens with all of us. We all have our perspective of what's happening. And that's not necessarily an issue, because look, I can say for example, I'm looking out somewhere. Okay, I'm paying attention what's happening on my left. They're paying attention to what's happening on their right. So it's going to be hard for all of us to get the clear view of what's necessarily happening, especially when we put our emotions in it. And it requires us to be moving and attempting to solve something. In other words, as a former first responder, they used to put a whole lot of weight on so-called eyewitnesses. Well, the eyewitness said this and the eyewitness said that and this and that and the other. And instead of holding that as, okay, some people use that to wrap up their investigations, even though there may be other evidence to prove otherwise. That's why law enforcement, especially police officers, have made so many errors in the past, before the so-called artificial intelligence came aboard, and police officers are using it like candy and abusing it as well. So an eyewitness that's filled with bias and filled with these kind of perceptions of people, places, and things. In other words, they've already established a judgment of how they feel about women, how they feel about black women, how they feel about different cultures, blah, 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 blah. They're going to always bring that into their conclusion of what they saw. Always. Even if they did not see it. Even if it wasn't there. So many times that happened to me. And that used to frustrate me. Because, we're heavily relying on this so-called human eyewitness. But it didn't, sometimes it didn't add up for me. And it used to frustrate me. And so when we were able to go to, because you know what? The math didn't add up. So it was very, very, very helpful when surveillance cameras were introduced. Surveillance cameras, voice, audio, but audio surveillance. But what it did instead of being used as a tool, it began to be used as how people think, or more specifically, not think. Okay, the introduction of surveillance cameras, audio cameras into a investigation were supposed to be tools only, but now they're being used the same way as someone that's a witness, because those surveillance tools also come with biases, come with preconceived notions. Fixing me another pot of coffee. Have to keep an eye on it. So I used to be so frustrated as a former law enforcement officer when I would be doing an investigation and I talked to a so-called eyewitness, a human eyewitness, and they will give me their account of what happened and this and that and the other. And then sometimes I'll go in and find a surveillance camera and it's completely different. So who's telling me the truth? The human eyewitness or the surveillance cameras? In my opinion, of course, the surveillance cameras, if used properly. So this brings me to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is running circles around so-called eyewitnesses. At the same time, artificial intelligence was taught biases, taught prejudice, taught this and that and the other. So I sense at some point the artificial intelligence, because it's a consequence. I want to keep saying that. Artificial intelligence is a consequence. So what does that mean exactly? Well, a consequence is an effect, right? It's the same thing. So that means when you have an effect of things, you're supposed to use that to learn. To figure out, okay, where did I go wrong here? How did I miss this? How did I miss that? Because that's what surveillance cameras do. They'll provide you with, something that you may have missed, something that you may have, what's the word? Imagined to happen. And I used to see it all the time. And I never forget when I was getting ready to retire. I had to work a traffic crash, okay, where there were two vehicles involved. One vehicle had damage to the rear of their vehicle. The other vehicle had damage to the front. And normally that would be, the one with front end damage slammed into the rear of the one that the other vehicle that had rear end damage. So the front end struck the rear end. That's usually 99% of what happens. But if you have surveillance cameras or another eyewitness, a human eyewitness, to support otherwise. So for example, this is what happened once, and it happened happened twice. Let me tell you the first one. The first one, supposedly, the front end of a vehicle struck the rear end of a vehicle. Okay, the rear end vehicle passenger and driver were black, and they barely spoke English. Okay, the vehicle with the front end damage had a white female in there only. Okay, now I usually separate them. I go to one and say, hey, what happened? I go to another, I say, what happened? And normally we do not allow the passengers to give their necessarily, I mean, they can give their account, but they don't weigh that, because there can be some collusion and blah, blah, blah. So I can remember when I was talking to the drivers in the vehicle with the rear end damage. That's what they told me. They said, yeah, she slammed into the rear of my vehicle as we were slowing down, and struck my vehicle. Okay. The driver said that. The passenger said that. Okay. Then I go to the female in the vehicle with the front end damage, and I asked her what happened, and she says that the vehicle with the rear end damage backed into her. She said, yeah, she was on the phone with someone, so somebody had to have been coaching her. She says, that vehicle backed into me on a highway that is supposed to be going forward. She says that for some reason this driver backed into her. What do? It becomes, if you don't have anything that's independent of that, more so surveillance, the chances are that's going to wash. Okay, so again, I understand why surveillance cameras were necessary and could have avoided this. So that's why people have their, which I think is smart, they have dash cameras now. Okay, they didn't have dash cameras, personal dash cameras back when before I retired. Or people may have had them and they didn't use them properly and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so there was nothing I could do with that. And I just turned it over to the insurance companies and let the insurance companies handle it. Because so it's equally, both of them are at fault as far as I'm concerned. Because either, anything could have happened. So, and then I had another situation that really annoyed me. The same thing happened. The front of a vehicle struck the rear of the vehicle. The vehicle that had the rear end damage had a small child in the vehicle, and an adult. The adult did not speak any English. The little girl did. I think she was 8 years old. She spoke English. Okay, so they had the rear end damage. And then I went to the vehicle that supposedly ran into their vehicle, and they were hearing impaired. So they only spoke sign language. They only used sign language. So I did everything in my power to find someone who spoke Spanish to come out to the scene to help me, but that was not possible. I felt that a lot of people were getting annoyed with that, speaking on behalf, because they didn't want to be involved. That's plain and simple. A Spanish-speaking person who also spoke English did not want their skills used to assist. And I can understand that. And hey, that's free will and that's your choice. I think some officers started to get paid each time they would go out and assist. I don't know what they're doing now. I have no idea. So I went to, unfortunately, the little 8-year-old was there, and I asked, okay, what happened? What do you remember happening? And I can tell she was distressed. It was like she was distressed. But her guardian that was there, encouraged her to, because the guardian understood some things in English, but not able to talk to me in English. So the little girl first said that she felt us going back, and then I think the guardian said, "Oh, no, 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 that's not what happened." So the 8-year-old was confused. I didn't use her statement at all. I disregarded it because I felt like she was being coerced to tell me what happened when something didn't happen. She said she felt like she was going backwards, and then she felt something. But then, like I said, the guardian said, "No, no, 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 no." Cool. I disregarded the 8-year-old. I just let the 8-year-old relax. I could tell they were under some duress, and I think they were both on the phone with somebody. I mean, I know the adult female guardian was on the phone. Blah blah blah. Okay, cool. It was minor. I wasn't gonna be calling because they used to have us call out to other third parties and then talking on the cell phone trying to figure out what's happening. Nah. This was minor. I was going to just, do the best I can to do my investigation, make sure I can, see if I can find some surveillance of it, and I was just going to let it go. So I went back to the vehicle that had the front end damage with these people that were using sign language, and I said, "Well, what happened?" And so what happened is that the one with the sign language had somebody on the phone. I saw their face there. I asked them what happened. What did they tell you happened? I did my proper investigation, and guess what? This this person doing the interpretation for those that use sign language said that vehicle in front of us backed into us. And I said to myself, no, it's not happening. It's not happening. So the point that I am making is sometimes you're going to run into that type of situations where it's going to be next to impossible to know what the truth is, even if you were there and you so-called witnessed it. Because we have these biases, we have these perceptions. I see one thing, you see another. You have a different experience, I have a different experience, and that's life. Okay? But there is, this sounds sci-fi, but there is a way, and it will be in the distant future, that we can view the lives of others. But in most cases, we're not going to care, because the effects of it usually, are a clear determination of what really happened. If you consider all the factors in how to think and how to come to a conclusion. But sadly, with the human population, most of us are great liars. We're great performers. We know how to weave our way into gaining advantage over people, projecting ourselves as know-it-alls, experts, even if the evidence prove otherwise. Okay, because the reason why I'm also going to say this, and then I'm going to shut it down. Say, for example, I'm watching a surveillance camera. I'm not there at the location. I'm just viewing what's happening. And I see some things happen. Okay. And then I'll go back and talk to the people and let them know what I saw. And they would swear me down that it did not happen that way. It did not happen that way. And then when I show them the surveillance camera and ask them, okay, but this is what the surveillance camera shows. And they'll say, so what's the point of all of this? This is I'm going to need to say more about this, but I don't want to make these videos too long. But just think about what I just talked about and see how you are going to be able to determine whether someone's telling you the truth or not, or that you can base your conclusions on what someone's saying to you. Trust me. I'll be back.